that jar of mayo in your fridge right now. It might not actually be real mayonnaise. I spent weeks going through the ingredient lists, the ownership histories, and the production methods of every major mayo brand sold in UK supermarkets. And what I found is going to change how you shop forever. Watered-down emulsions legally sold as mayo, beloved British brands quietly gutted after corporate takeovers, and a yolk colour trick so simple it'll make you furious. Let's expose it. Number 5. Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise. Heinz is one of the most trusted names in British food. That's exactly the problem. Heinz Seriously Good is the best-selling mayonnaise in the UK. It's on almost every table. It's what most people reach for without a second thought because it's Heinz. And Heinz means quality, right? Here's what they don't put on the front of the jar. Heinz is owned by Kraft Heinz, a company formed in 2015 through a merger engineered by 3G Capital, a private equity firm notorious across the food industry for one specific strategy: zero-based budgeting. Every single cost in the business has to be rejustified from scratch each year. Every ingredient, every production method, the pressure to cut is relentless and structural. And it shows up in the jar. Turn it around. The primary ingredient is rapeseed oil, not cold-pressed, not expeller-pressed, industrially refined rapeseed oil processed at high heat to squeeze maximum yield from minimum cost. After that, water. Then egg yolk, the ingredient that should be defining this product. Third, and only then, spirit vinegar. Now, in the UK, there's no single statutory legal standard for mayonnaise, but the European Industry Code of Practice sets a benchmark of at least 70% fat and a minimum of 5% egg yolk. Heinz sits below that fat benchmark at 68% oil and hits exactly the 5% egg yolk floor. Not a gram more. So they fill the rest with water, then use starch to give it a texture that resembles something properly made. It also contains calcium disodium EDTA. This is a synthetic chelating agent whose sole job is to stop the cheap refined oil from going rancid before it reaches your kitchen. Without it, the oil they've chosen would develop off flavors within weeks of production. The EDTA isn't improving your mayo, it's propping up the corner they've cut. And the seriously good on the label, no regulatory meaning, none. It's marketing copy dressed up as a quality statement. Customer reviews across Tesco, Sainsbury's and Ocado increasingly use the same words. Thinner. Aftertaste. Doesn't taste like it used to, they're not imagining it. They're tasting the gap between a brand's inherited reputation and what Kraft Heinz has decided that reputation is worth protecting. Avoid. Number 4. Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise. Hellmann's built its entire identity on one word, real. And for a long time that word was genuinely earned. The brand started in New York in 1905. Richard Hellmann was a German immigrant who opened a deli and started jarring his wife's mayonnaise because customers couldn't stop buying it. That's a real origin story. The product matched the mythology. Then the acquisitions started. First sold in 1927, passed through corporate hands, and eventually landing with Unilever in 2000. And Unilever, which also owns Marmite, Dove Soap, and Ben & Jerry's, didn't buy Hellmann's because they wanted to protect a recipe. They bought it for the brand equity, the trust that generations of families had placed in that blue and cream label. And trust, it turns out, is extremely useful when you're quietly reformulating. The changes don't happen overnight. That would trigger complaints and returns and column inches. They happen in small, invisible increments across years. A cheaper oil blend 1/4, a synthetic stabilizer introduced to compensate for the cheaper oil. Egg content nudged downward, offset by a thickener so the texture doesn't obviously collapse. Today, Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise in the UK leads with refined rapeseed oil. It contains starch. It contains calcium disodium EDTA, the same synthetic rancidity preventer we saw in Heinz. The egg content sits well below what any home cook would use, making this from scratch. Here's what makes this worse than Heinz, though. Heinz doesn't have a 120-year story about a man and his wife and a deli counter. Hellmann's does. And Unilever tells that story on every jar while systematically moving away from everything that made it true. The word real on the label is a legal classification confirming minimum technical compliance. Unilever knows that almost every shopper reads it as a quality promise. That gap is worth hundreds of millions of pounds a year to them. They're not closing it anytime soon. Number 3. Little Bat's mayonnaise. Most people assume the budget supermarkets are the obvious villains in a video like this, and with mayo, that assumption is largely correct. But understanding why matters because it changes how you shop across the whole store. Bat's is Lidl's own brand mayo, and it is engineered entirely around a single question. What is the cheapest thing we can legally call mayonnaise? Not what makes a great mayo, not what makes a good mayo. The legal floor. That's the target. The result is refined rapeseed oil as the primary ingredient, water, egg at or near the minimum required for the product to qualify under UK food standards, and modified starch to generate the appearance of a proper emulsion without the ingredient cost of building one. There are also multiple preservatives, because cheap refined oil degrades quickly and needs chemical support to survive the journey from factory to shelf to your fridge. Here's where it shows up in real life. In a sandwich, cold and straight from the fridge, Bat's is actually fine. Passable. It does the job. The moment you use it in anything that requires the mayo to actually perform. A potato salad, a coleslaw, anything mixed with warm ingredients or left at room temperature. The modified starch starts to fail. The emulsion that was never a real emulsion begins to separate. You get a watery, slightly curdled result that looks like a mistake. And most people blame themselves, the recipe, the potatoes, their technique. It's none of those things. It's modified starch doing what modified starch does under thermal stress, which is failing to replicate what actual eggs do naturally. At this price point, you are not buying mayonnaise. You are buying the legal minimum representation of the concept. Number 2. Aldi Bramwell's mayonnaise. Same production philosophy as Bat's, different budget supermarket, and the ingredient story is nearly identical. Refined rapeseed oil, minimal egg content, modified starch to simulate texture, preservatives to compensate for oil quality. The fundamentals of how this product is made are interchangeable with Lidl's own brand, but Bramwell's earns its spot at number 2 for a specific reason that Bat's doesn't trigger in the same way. The packaging is genuinely misleading. The label is clean, bright yellow, and looks credible. The product photographs well, the color looks rich. It sits in a supermarket that has, fairly, built a reputation for quality across other categories. Aldi's cheeses have won blind taste tests against supermarket giants. Their wine regularly outperforms bottles costing 3 times as much. Their butter is excellent, so shoppers extend that credibility to everything on the shelves, including the mayo. That credibility transfer is doing enormous work for Bramwell's that the product hasn't earned. Because the cheese is genuinely good. The mayo is not the cheese. There's also a specific labeling issue worth flagging. The front of the Bramwell's jar uses language around rich and creamy that implies a product built on proper egg content and quality oil. Flip it over. Modified starch appears before you get to any meaningful egg content. Rich and creamy in this context means a laboratory thickener has been added to create that impression. That's not the same thing as actually being rich and creamy. Number 1. Stokes Real Mayonnaise. This is the one that's going to cause arguments in the comments. Because Stokes is the brand that food lovers recommend. It's what you find in the premium section. It's got the Suffolk Farm branding, the traditional recipe story, the clean label aesthetic. It costs 2 to 3 times what Heinz charges. And it markets itself explicitly on quality, provenance, and authenticity. That positioning is exactly why it's number 1 on this list. The primary oil in Stokes Real Mayonnaise is rapeseed oil. Not cold-pressed, standard refined rapeseed oil. The same base ingredient used by Heinz, Hellmann's and Aldi's budget range. For a brand charging a significant price premium on the basis of being better, that is not acceptable. Now, to be fair to Stokes, and this matters, the egg content is genuinely higher than the budget brands. The texture is noticeably thicker, the flavor is more rounded and complex. These are real differences and real improvements. If you're choosing between Stokes and Hellmann's at your local deli, Stokes is the better product, but that's not the right comparison. The right comparison is between what Stokes charges, what Stokes claims, and what Stokes actually puts in the jar. When you're paying artisan prices and receiving refined rapeseed oil with better than average egg content and a nice label, you're not getting artisan mayo. You're getting a marketing story that the ingredient panel only partially supports. The cheap brands never claim to be anything other than cheap. Stokes is claiming to be something it isn't entirely. And that dishonesty at that price point earns it the top spot. Before the good stuff, two brands worth understanding properly. Hellmann's vegan mayo. Counterintuitively, this is a better-made product than the original. Because Unilever couldn't rely on minimal egg content and EDTA to prop up cheap oil, they had to actually reformulate properly. The emulsification is more stable, the texture holds better, and while it still uses refined oil, the overall product behaves more like real mayo than its egg-based sibling. If your household buys Hellmann's out of habit and you want to make a quiet upgrade, the vegan version is the better jar. Tesco Finest Mayonnaise. This one genuinely surprises people. Tesco's premium own label uses free-range egg yolks rather than whole eggs. Yolk-only formulations produce a richer, more stable emulsion because the yolk is where all the lecithin lives, the compound that actually holds an emulsion together. It's not a perfect product and the oil is still refined rapeseed, but at this price point it punches well above the standard own brand tier. Worth knowing about if Tesco is your regular shop. The 5 worth buying. Number 5. Stokes Truffle Mayonnaise. Yes, Stokes appears on both lists. The standard real mayo doesn't justify its premium positioning. The truffle mayo is an entirely different conversation. First, the formulation changes. To properly carry truffle flavor, which is fat-soluble and delicate, you need a higher egg yolk proportion in the base. Stokes has done that here, and the result is noticeably richer and more structured than their standard range. The base actually earns the truffle rather than just floating it. Second, when the flavor profile is this distinct and this specific, you're no longer buying a background condiment. You're buying an ingredient, and judged as an ingredient, alongside a bavette steak, folded through roasted new potatoes, spread inside a fried chicken sandwich. It genuinely delivers on what the Stokes brand promises. The standard version makes claims the jar doesn't back up. The truffle version makes fewer claims and exceeds them. Available at Waitrose, Ocado, and most farm shops stocking Stokes products. Number 4. Tracklement's Whole Egg Mayonnaise. Tracklement's has been making condiments in Wiltshire since 1970. That's not heritage marketing, that's an actual production history that predates the corporate consolidation that gutted most of the brands on the avoid list. And this mayo is what you'd expect from a company with that ethos and that track record. Whole free-range eggs, cold-pressed rapeseed oil, Dijon mustard, white wine vinegar. That's the foundation. No modified starch, no EDTA, no synthetic preservatives. The texture is thick and genuinely stable because the emulsion is built from real ingredients doing what real ingredients are supposed to do. The cold-pressed rapeseed oil is the critical distinction from everything on the avoid list. Cold pressing retains the natural flavor compounds and micronutrients that industrial refining strips out completely. The result is an oil with actual character, mild, slightly nutty, that contributes to the flavor of the mayo rather than just providing an anonymous neutral fat base. It's the difference between an ingredient and a commodity. The Dijon mustard in the formulation isn't decorative either. Mustard contains compounds that act as natural emulsifiers, helping bind the oil and egg into a more stable structure. Traditional mayo recipes have always used it for exactly this reason. The fact that Tracklement still does tells you something about how they approach the recipe. Find it at independent farm shops, Waitrose and Ocado. It costs more than Heinz. It is categorically not the same product as Heinz. Number 3. Bella Zoo Roast Garlic Mayonnaise. Bella Zoo built its reputation on sourcing genuinely exceptional Mediterranean ingredients. The aged balsamic, the preserved lemons, the rose harissa that became a restaurant staple. The mayo comes from the same sourcing philosophy, and it shows immediately in the primary ingredient. Extra virgin olive oil, not a blend, not made with olive oil. Extra virgin, cold-pressed, unrefined with the full polyphenol content intact. Those polyphenols are what give real olive oil its bitterness, its peppery finish, and its genuine health properties. They're also natural antioxidants, which means the product doesn't need calcium disodium, EDTA, or synthetic preservatives to stay stable. The oil itself does that work. The roast garlic is worth addressing specifically because garlic flavoring in condiments is usually a disappointment. Thin, sharp, synthetic. Bella Zoo's is genuinely roasted, which transforms the flavor from harsh and raw to sweet, rounded, and deep. It integrates into the mayo rather than sitting on top of it. This is not a neutral background condiment, and it's not trying to be. It's an ingredient. Use it on roasted cauliflower alongside grilled lamb as a dip with sourdough. stirred through a warm potato salad where the olive oil flavor can actually open up with the heat. Available at Waitrose, Ocado, and independent delis. If you've never had a proper olive oil mayo, start here. Number 2. Chosen Foods Avocado Oil Mayo, now more widely available in the UK through Ocado and Holland and Barrett, and it's worth knowing about because it occupies a space nothing else on this list quite fills. Genuinely premium ingredients at a price that's only marginally above the mid-market brands. The oil is 100% pure avocado oil. Not an avocado oil blend with rapeseed to bring costs down while still getting avocado on the label. A trick several brands use. Pure, cold-pressed avocado oil, which is rich in monounsaturated fats and has one of the most neutral flavor profiles of any quality oil. That neutrality matters. 5 ingredients total. Avocado oil, cage-free eggs, egg yolks, distilled vinegar, sea salt. No modified starch, no gums, no synthetic preservatives. The inclusion of both whole eggs and additional yolks is deliberate. It builds a richer, more stable lecithin base than whole eggs alone, giving the mayo a texture that holds properly under real cooking conditions. Make a potato salad with this, leave it out at a summer barbecue for 2 hours, come back to it. The emulsion holds. It doesn't weep. It doesn't separate, because it was built from real ingredients that know how to behave, not from a starch that falls apart the moment conditions change. If Kewpie is too specific for everyday use and Belazoo is too distinctive, this is your all-purpose answer. Number 1. Kewpie. Kewpie has been Japan's dominant mayonnaise since 1925. Professional chefs across the UK have quietly used it for years. It's now widely available at Waitrose, Japan Centre, most Asian supermarkets, and Ocado, often at a price comparable to Heinz Seriously Good. Here's what separates it from everything else on this list, good and bad. Every other mayo, budget brands, premium brands, artisan brands, uses whole eggs. Kewpie uses only egg yolks. This is not a minor variation. The egg white contributes volume but almost nothing to emulsification or flavor. The yolk contains the lecithin that creates a genuinely stable emulsion, the fat-soluble compounds that give mayo its color and richness, and the flavor depth that makes it taste like something rather than nothing. Using whole eggs dilutes all of that. Using only yolks concentrates it. The result is a mayo that is more golden, more stable, and noticeably richer at a fundamental structural level. Not because of an additive, but because of a better decision about the core ingredient. It also uses rice vinegar rather than the spirit vinegar that British brands default to. Spirit vinegar is sharp and one-dimensional. Rice vinegar is gentler and more rounded, with an acidity that lifts the other flavors rather than cutting through them. It's why Kewpie works in a chicken sandwich without dominating, in a potato salad without sharpness, on a toasty without the slight harshness you get from British mayo. At its price point, nothing comes close. A century of refinement against decades of cost-cutting. That's the competition. And it isn't particularly close. So here's what you actually do next time you're in the condiment aisle. Flip the jar over, not the front, the back. Find the ingredient list and ask 2 questions. What is the oil and where does egg appear? If the oil is refined rapeseed and egg appears third or lower, you're looking at a product built to a price point, not a standard. If the oil is cold-pressed, rapeseed, avocado, or olive, an egg or egg yolk sits high on the list, that product was built around the actual ingredient. Tracklements, Belazoo, Chosen Foods, Kewpie. These aren't all expensive. Kewpie is cheaper than Heinz Seriously Good. In most places you'll find both. You don't have to spend a fortune to stop getting ripped off. You just have to stop trusting the front of the jar. If this helped, hit the like button. Drop a comment telling me which brand shocked you most. I read everyone. And if you want to know what else in your weekly shop isn't what it claims to be, subscribe, because we want you to know.